Monique, a black woman working as a cleaning service at Nextera Robotics, always arrived first and left last. She was known only by her uniform, not her mind. No one knew she held a degree in Chinese literature. When word spread that major investors from China were visiting, the office went into panic. No one spoke Mandarin. Monique offered to help but was laughed off. "You? Mandarin? Maybe from movie subtitles," one manager mocked. The day of the meeting came. The investors arrived early. Chaos ensued. Monique, still mopping the lobby, stepped forward and greeted them in fluent Mandarin. The room shifted. The investors smiled. Conversation flowed smoothly. Monique bridged cultures and saved the presentation. Days later, a $750 million deal was signed. At the next staff meeting, the CEO stood and said, "Today, this company stands tall because of someone we ignored, just because of her skin color and her uniform." Now everyone saw Monique, not as the cleaner, but as the hero they had underestimated for far too long. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode will be even more intense. Chapter 1. Shadow in the Corridor. Monique had a rhythm to her mornings. Before the sun even touched the glass walls of Nextera Robotics, she was already there, quiet, deliberate, sweeping through the silent lobby with a mop in hand and a checklist in her mind. The smell of citrus cleaner mixed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights was the only company she had at that hour. To most of the company's high-performing employees, she was invisible. Monique was the cleaning lady, a ghost who glided between offices, emptied trash bins, and made coffee stains disappear from desks before anyone arrived to notice them. They didn't see her. Not really. She was just part of the furniture. The warm body behind a broom, the blue uniform that meant not one of us. No one asked about her weekend. No one knew her full name. She heard their footsteps long before she saw their faces. Expensive shoes clicked on polished marble. Voices floated in from the elevators. Casual, self-important, buzzwords strung together like pearls. They laughed, they cursed at emails, they paced while yelling into AirPods. And Monique? She stepped out of the way, like a shadow. Sometimes a manager would nod at her. Most didn't. Some handed her coffee cups without a word, expecting them to disappear. Once she was handed a folder and told to drop it off in the mailroom. They never realized she wasn't staff. Not that kind of staff. Yet behind the quiet nods and mop strokes, Monique held a secret. She had a degree in Chinese literature from a respected university overseas. She once spent hours discussing Confucian philosophy and reading Tang poetry aloud in fluent Mandarin. She'd even taught Chinese to international students. But life had not followed the path she had planned. A string of circumstances, visa issues, a sick mother, a financial fall, had led her here, cleaning floors in a tech company that didn't know her mind, only her silence. There were days she questioned her own value. When she wiped up someone's spilled kombucha and heard them joke, "Guess I don't need to clean up, Monique's got it," she forced a smile that tasted like iron. At night, she read Mandarin novels, business books, startup profiles. She followed Chinese tech news more closely than most of the engineers at Nextera. She wasn't bitter, just waiting. Waiting for the world to see past the polyester and the name tag. And yet, every morning, as the world rushed past her with keycards and confidence, she remained a ghost in the corridor. The same floor she polished was the same floor that carried careers upward, except hers. The elevator doors closed just as she approached. Meetings began just as she turned to leave. Promotions came and went for people who didn't know the difference between Chengyu and Pinyin. But Monique didn't carry resentment. She carried resilience. She moved quietly, but with grace. She listened more than she spoke, and she knew deeply that if the world ever stopped long enough to truly look, really look, they'd see what she was made of. Not bleach, not brushes, but brilliance. Chapter 2. The Mind Behind the Uniform. Most people assumed Monique's uniform told her whole story. Dark navy, short sleeves, industrial name patch stitched above her chest, Monique J. It was the kind of uniform that erased identity, boiled a person down to function. It didn't whisper of poetry or language or dreams. It said, mop floors, take orders, stay out of the way. But under that uniform, Monique carried a mind sharp enough to slice through ignorance. In her bag, buried between sanitizer wipes and replacement gloves, sat a worn paperback copy of Dream of the Red Chamber, marked with sticky notes and scribbles in 2 languages. She read it during her breaks, her eyes dancing through ancient metaphors and layered symbolism, while the world outside looked at her and saw nothing. She remembered the pride in her mother's eyes the day she graduated. The dean of the Chinese language department had shaken her hand with both palms and said, "Your fluency rivals our native students." Professors used to ask her to assist in cultural seminars. She was once invited to Beijing for a cross-cultural workshop, where she gave a lecture on the evolution of classical Chinese idioms, and now she was wiping whiteboards and sorting trash by recycling codes. It was easy to feel bitter, but Monique refused. Bitterness was a distraction. She had chosen grace, not as weakness, but as power. She used silence like armor. When people spoke around her as if she wasn't there, she listened. When executives practiced Mandarin phrases in loud, clumsy accents ahead of global calls, she quietly corrected their tones in her head. One afternoon, she overheard 2 junior developers in the break room. "Did you see the CEO's email?" one of them said. "Chinese investors, big deal, whole department's scrambling." "God help us," the other laughed. "We'll be nodding through translations like idiots." Monique paused at the doorway, hands full of trash bags. Something in her stirred. It wasn't just the timing, it was the irony. They were bracing for a culture and a language they had barely tried to understand, terrified of appearing foolish. Meanwhile, the person they ignored every day could recite Li Bai's poetry from memory and explain the historical context of the Tang Dynasty's civil service exams. But even then, she said nothing. Not yet. She had learned the power of restraint. The world didn't need to be told everything up front. Sometimes, silence was its own kind of revolution. And deep inside, she believed, one day her moment would come. Not because she demanded it, but because when the curtain finally lifted, her brilliance would be impossible to ignore. Monique wasn't waiting for permission. She was preparing for opportunity. And when it came, she would be ready, not just to speak, but to lead. Chapter 3. The Laugh That Burned. The email came on a Wednesday. One sentence, bold and centered at the top of the company-wide memo. "We are honored to host senior executives from Zhenhua Capital this Friday." Buzz erupted like wildfire. Desks became war rooms. Presentation slides were polished until they gleamed, charts revised, scripts rehearsed. Nextera Robotics had been chasing Chinese capital for months, and now the decision-makers were flying in. "Think Series C, but massive," one manager whispered in awe. "This is billion-dollar talk." The whole building shifted into a higher gear. Except for Monique, who still mopped the same corners she always did, still changed the same trash bags, still heard her name only when someone spilled something. But she listened. She heard about the investor team. All Mandarin speakers with minimal English proficiency. She heard the executive assistant scrambling for a Mandarin translator. She saw the CTO attempting to memorize key phrases phonetically. It was clumsy, desperate. And then it happened. In the middle of a prep meeting, Monique, cleaning the back of the conference room, gathered her courage and spoke up. "If it helps, I speak fluent Mandarin," she said quietly. "I could help interpret if—" The room fell silent. 7 heads turned toward her like she'd just barked. For a second, there was confusion. Then came the sound that would stay with her for years. Laughter. Not just polite disbelief, dismissive laughter. From a man in a crisp navy suit. You speak Mandarin? He didn't even try to hide the grin twisting on his face. Another added, Fluent, huh? What is that, Netflix level or TikTok? The laughter grew louder. One woman snorted. Someone muttered, She's just trying to get out of wiping tables. Monique didn't flinch. She didn't stammer or blush. She didn't shrink, though she felt the sting bloom deep in her chest like wildfire. She simply nodded, whispered, Never mind, and stepped out, mop trailing softly behind her like a cape dragged through ash. But what they didn't see, what they never saw, was what happened next. That night, Monique didn't cry. She didn't even replay the humiliation. Instead, she sat at her small kitchen table, opened her Mandarin journal, and started translating Nextera's corporate pitch into perfect Chinese, line by line, with care. Because even after being laughed at, even after being reduced to a stereotype, she still believed in readiness. She still believed in being prepared, not for their acceptance, but for the moment the world stumbled and needed someone to step in. She wasn't waiting for validation. She was writing her own script. Chapter 4. The Panic Before the Pitch. Thursday hit like a storm. Emails flew. Floors were cleared. Presentation decks were restructured for the fourth time. The leadership team at Nextera Robotics moved like ants in a glass box. Urgent, erratic, polished in posture but ragged at the edges. Everything had to be perfect. The Zhenhua Capital team was arriving Friday morning. Investors from China, billionaires. A possible multi-round commitment on the table. What the team didn't have still was a proper interpreter. The executive assistant, flushed and frantic, ran down the hallway with a phone glued to her ear. No, we need in person, she barked. Friday, Mandarin, business-level fluency, tech vocabulary. No, not virtual. No, not basic conversational. Please. In a side room, the CTO was practicing how to say autonomous logistics solutions in Mandarin. It sounded like someone gargling through a flute. Someone else suggested printing cue cards with Mandarin scripts and just winging it. A nervous intern was tasked with creating a backup slide deck that used only images and percentages, in case translation totally breaks down. Monique watched all of this unfold. From the far edge of the glass meeting room, broom in hand, she absorbed every frantic whisper, every botched pronunciation, every discarded plan. Her hands moved like always, cleaning fingerprints off glass, scrubbing scuff marks from tile. But her mind was sprinting ahead. She had already translated the full pitch deck in her notebook the night before. She'd even practiced delivering the key points aloud. She knew how the tone should rise when speaking of innovation, how it should soften when speaking of partnership. She knew Mandarin's rhythm, its poise, its respect. They didn't. And yet, no one looked at her. She passed by the same team she had offered to help, and they didn't even glance her way, as if her moment of courage yesterday had been an annoyance, a glitch in their hierarchy. By afternoon, the executives were in a full-blown frenzy. We're screwed, someone muttered. If we mess this up, Zhenhua walks. Someone suggested using Google Translate on a tablet with a Bluetooth speaker. Another replied, that's how you insult someone's ancestors on accident. Even then, no one called Monique. And so she cleaned the main lobby, the glass entrance where the investors would walk through. She wiped the logo on the wall, Nextera Robotics, until it gleamed like gold. She adjusted the placement of the welcome sign, centering it just so. If no one asked her to be part of the front, at least she could prepare the stage. And still, something in her stirred, not with anger, but with certainty. They were going to need her. She didn't know how or when, but the storm of their own arrogance had left them blind, and blind people eventually trip. All Monique had to do was stand exactly where she always had, calm, prepared, invisible, until they finally saw her. Chapter 5. Early Arrival. Friday morning came cloaked in tension. The building buzzed like a high-voltage wire, clean desks, polished chrome, projection screens glowing idle blue. Suits were sharper, shoes shinier, coffee cups trembling slightly in anxious hands. The Nextera team stood like chess pieces waiting for the match to begin. The plan was airtight. Investors from Zhenhua Capital would arrive at precisely 10 a.m. A reception team would greet them with scripted pleasantries. An executive would give a brief welcome. Then the carefully choreographed presentation would begin, with hopeful patchwork Mandarin and a prayer. But at 8:42 a.m., everything unraveled. The security guard's voice came crackling through the internal intercom. Front desk to executive, the Zhenhua team just arrived. Silence. Then chaos. "They're early?" The VP of operations half shouted. 2 hours early? The assistant gasped, dropping her tablet. "They weren't supposed to. Did anyone confirm time zone?" Another muttered, already sweating. Desks were cleared in seconds, jackets thrown on, lipstick rushed, PowerPoint opened and repositioned mid-loading. But the biggest problem was still towering in the air, unspoken and unsolved. No translator, no interpreter, no plan. The CEO turned toward the assistant. "Did you... I couldn't get anyone last minute," she stammered. "I left voicemails." "No Mandarin?" the CTO asked quietly, eyes wide. Nothing. No one. Panic thickened the air like smoke. Monique stood just outside the lobby doors, Windex in one hand, rag in the other, adjusting the angle of a mirror she'd cleaned minutes earlier. She heard the voices, low, courteous Mandarin. She understood every word. The Zhenhua team had arrived early out of respect. "We didn't want to cause inconvenience," one said to the receptionist with a smile. "In our culture, being early shows sincerity." Monique stepped back, watching the flurry behind the glass. The Nextera execs looked frozen, like dancers who'd missed their cue. They stood there, slick with nervous energy, mouths opening but no words forming. And then, without a word, Monique walked forward. She pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the lobby, still in her navy blue uniform. Her curly hair was tied back. Her name patch caught the morning light. She looked directly at the Zhenhua team, bowed slightly, and spoke with calm, crisp Mandarin. "Huan Ying Guang Lin. Qing Yuan Liang Woman Huanwei Junbei Hao. Qing Jin. Welcome. Please forgive us. We weren't yet prepared. Please come in." The lead investor blinked, surprised, then smiled warmly. "Ni hui shuo zhongwen? You speak Chinese?" Monique nodded, still holding her rag, still smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. "Wo hui." "I do." Inside, behind the glass, jaws dropped. The CTO's coffee nearly spilled. The CEO stood frozen, mouth slightly ajar. Monique didn't look back. She guided the guests inside like she belonged, like this moment had always been meant for her. Because it had. Chapter 6. Fluency and Confidence. The glass doors closed behind them with a soft hush. Monique led the Zhenhua team into the lobby, her posture steady, voice composed. The executives followed behind, trying not to stumble, emotionally or literally, struck by what they were witnessing. The woman they had dismissed was now the only one speaking the language that mattered. She turned to the investors, gestured toward the seating area, and said in perfect Mandarin, "Please, make yourselves comfortable while I let the leadership team know you've arrived." They nodded with visible relief. One even laughed lightly and said, "It's refreshing to be greeted properly." We were worried about awkward English again. Monique smiled politely and bowed, then turned and walked, not rushed, not hesitant, into the heart of Nextera's chaos. Inside the executive suite, the team was frozen like mannequins. Did she really just... Someone stammered. "She speaks Mandarin," the assistant whispered, stunned. "Fluent. She wasn't lying." The CEO looked as if he'd swallowed a stone. "Where has she been this whole time?" Monique stepped inside and addressed them in calm English. "They've arrived. They're seated. I've welcomed them and let them know you'll be out shortly." The room remained silent. Her presence in that moment shifted the very gravity of the room. No longer the cleaning lady, she stood tall, not in a suit, not with a title, but with the kind of poise that couldn't be taught in a boardroom. "They're expecting the presentation in Mandarin?" the CEO finally asked. "They are," Monique replied evenly, "and they're relieved someone can guide it." For the first time, her voice wasn't just heard, it was respected. The CTO stepped forward. Monique, would you be willing to interpret?" She looked at him, measured, then nodded. "Yes. But I won't just translate. I'll help tell the story." The CEO straightened his tie, still stunned. "Then, let's tell it right." When they returned to the lobby together, Monique walked beside them, not behind. She introduced each executive with fluid precision, pronouncing every name, every title, every department, with the confidence of someone who understood both worlds. She translated not just words, but intention. When the CTO fumbled a phrase about system interoperability, Monique rephrased it with grace. When the VP cracked a nervous joke, she softened it, weaving it into a cultural tone the investors could appreciate. The room came alive, not with anxiety, but with connection. By the time the slides appeared on screen, the presentation wasn't about selling tech. It was about trust. And Monique was the bridge that made it possible. Chapter 7. The room turns. The room, once stiff with formality and nerves, had started to loosen. It was subtle at first. A smile from the lead investor as Monique gracefully interpreted a complex explanation about Nextera's proprietary AI. A nod from another as she clarified a cultural nuance in the company's roadmap. The Mandarin she spoke was elegant, calm, and confident. Not textbook, but lived. She didn't just translate, she guided. When the CTO veered into too much technical jargon, Monique gently streamlined it, layering context and meaning. When the VP of strategy offered statistics, she highlighted what would matter most to the investors: efficiency, longevity, scalability. Every phrase she relayed landed clearly. Every answer felt deliberate, intentional. By the 10th slide, something undeniable had happened. The investors weren't looking at the CEO anymore. They weren't watching the product video. They were watching her. Monique sat slightly behind the executive team, still in her dark blue uniform. But it didn't matter anymore. She had become the voice of the company, its interpreter, its ambassador, its human face. When one of the senior investors leaned forward and asked, "Where did you learn such fluent Mandarin?" The room held its breath. Monique smiled. "I studied classical Chinese literature. My degree is in Mandarin language and culture." The room was silent. And then, a soft laugh from the investor. He looked to the CEO. "You didn't tell us your communications director had such impressive language skills." The CEO swallowed. "She's not—" he started, but stopped himself. Monique turned to translate, but the CEO raised a hand. "No need," he said, eyes still on her. "Actually, Monique, why don't you answer that yourself?" Her voice was steady. "I'm not the communications director," she said. "I'm a member of the facilities team." The lead investor blinked, then smiled wider than before. "You're the most valuable voice in this room." That was when the shift became impossible to ignore. The energy in the room didn't just turn, it transformed. What began as a high-stakes business pitch had become a rare human moment. A moment of honesty, of humility, of brilliance shining through layers of assumption. The presentation ended, not with applause, but with deep mutual nods, respect, real and earned. And Monique? She didn't ask for credit. She didn't need it. She simply stood, bowed politely, and thanked them for their time. But everyone in that room knew the meeting's success had a name. and it wasn't on the company website. Chapter 8. Backstage. Silence. The moment the investors exited the room, the silence hit like a thunderclap. Not the kind born from tension or failure, but the awkward, reverent kind that follows a seismic shift. No one rushed to their phones. No one celebrated. No one moved. Monique stood off to the side, as always. But everything had changed. The CEO turned to her slowly, as if seeing her with new eyes. Not the woman who swept the lobbies, but the woman who'd just rescued the company's most important meeting. The room didn't know what to say. It was the VP of product who spoke first, voice just above a whisper. How long have you been with us? 18 months, Monique answered calmly. 18 months, he repeated, almost in disbelief. And all this time, he didn't finish. The CTO stepped forward. You knew the product better than I did. You read the deck once and made it sound like poetry. I've been cleaning around your whiteboards for over a year, Monique said, almost smiling. You'd be surprised what you learn just listening. They all looked away, shame prickling beneath their collars. The executive assistant, cheeks flushed, clutched her tablet. Why didn't you say something sooner? I did, Monique replied evenly. You laughed. Silence again. Sharper this time. The CEO cleared his throat. Monique, we owe you a massive apology. Not just for today, for the way we've... He stopped, looking for a word other than ignored, overlooked, or belittled. For the way we've failed to recognize what's right in front of us. Monique nodded. Thank you. I appreciate that. She was calm, but inside 100 emotions swirled. Relief, vindication, a kind of sadness too. It had taken a corporate crisis and the risk of a failed investment for them to see her, for her voice to matter. She hadn't asked for glory. She didn't want pity. She had only ever wanted one thing, to be seen for who she was, not what she wore. The CEO looked around the room, then back at Monique. You didn't just save a meeting. You changed this company's trajectory. That's not a favor. That's leadership. He paused, then added quietly, What can we do for you? For the first time in a long time, Monique didn't have to clean up anyone's mess. She was standing in the one spot no one had prepared for her, yet it finally felt like where she belonged. At the center, not the edge. She didn't answer right away, because for the first time, they were willing to wait for her words. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 9. The unsigned name, where recognition begins to ripple beyond the room, but Monique's name still isn't where it should be. Chapter 9. The unsigned name. The next morning, the headline came in an internal company newsletter, Nextera impresses Zhenhua Capital in high-stakes presentation. The article praised the executive team's professionalism, commended the company's clear vision and global readiness, and quoted an unnamed Zhenhua executive calling the presentation surprisingly human. It mentioned graceful communication, cross-cultural resonance, and exceptional linguistic handling. But it didn't mention Monique. Not once. She read it in the break room, standing alone beside the industrial coffee maker, still in her navy blue uniform. She wasn't surprised. Not really. But it still stung. The quiet kind of sting. The one that settles in your throat and doesn't come out as tears, just silence. The email ended with congratulations to the CTO, the CEO, and the incredible team behind the scenes. Behind the scenes? She was always behind something, a mop, a glass wall, a locked door to opportunity, even now. Later that afternoon, the hallway buzzed with energy. Investors were extending conversations. An assistant mentioned the potential deal might close in weeks, not months. The CTO walked past Monique and gave her a nod, grateful, yes, but hesitant. As if he wasn't sure what category she belonged to now. She wasn't staff, but she wasn't quite team either, that in-between space. She returned to her usual duties, restocking supplies, organizing equipment, wiping down surfaces. Everything looked the same. No new badge, no office, no invitation to the follow-up meetings. She didn't expect one, but that didn't mean it didn't matter. In her pocket, she carried a folded copy of the translated presentation she'd written. Still handwritten, still unofficial. Her name wasn't on that either. That evening, as the office emptied out, Monique walked past the main digital board in the lobby. It now showed a slideshow. Investor photos, product mock-ups, shots from the presentation. Slide 6 showed the room at its peak. Investors smiling, the execs speaking. Monique was visible. Barely. In the background, half in shadow, mid-translation. Her mouth open, her hand gesturing slightly. The caption read, "Delivering the pitch of a lifetime." Not delivered by Monique, just delivered. She stood for a long moment in front of that screen, then turned and walked away. Not bitter, but certain. They could leave her name out of the slides, out of the email, out of the photo captions. But they could never remove what she did. And someday, when the story of Nextera's turning point was told with honesty, truly told, it would begin with her. Chapter 10. The CEO's Pause. Daniel Price, CEO of Nextera Robotics, sat alone in his office that evening. His blazer hung on the back of his chair, his sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his laptop screen glowed with unread emails. But his eyes weren't on the numbers, or projections, or post-meeting summaries. He was watching the recording, the full video of the Genhua presentation. He had asked for it for review, but what he really wanted was to see it again, without the adrenaline, without the performance, without the noise, to watch it clearly, honestly. Monique appeared on screen just 12 seconds in, still in her navy blue uniform, still anonymous in the eyes of the room. But as the footage unfolded, something struck him with quiet force. It wasn't just that she spoke Mandarin, it was how. Her cadence, her control, the way she didn't just translate the team's words, but elevated them, reframed them. She made their ideas feel intentional, thoughtful, global. He watched himself speak at the halfway mark, stumbling over a joke meant to build rapport. Then Monique translated it, not word for word, but with cultural nuance. The investors laughed. He remembered thinking they liked me, but now, watching again, he saw the truth. They liked her. She carried the room, and when she said, "I'm not the communications director. I'm part of the facilities team," the energy in the room shifted. So did his posture. On screen, he looked rattled, unprepared, because he had been, because he had never noticed her. The realization weighed on him now more than ever. 18 months. He'd walked past her dozens, hundreds of times, never stopped, never asked, not even once. He leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his hair, and stared at the paused frame of Monique on screen. In that moment, he saw more than just a staff member who saved a meeting. He saw something far harder to admit. The system had failed her. He had failed her. She had outperformed everyone in that room, and she hadn't even been on the schedule. He closed the laptop slowly. It wasn't enough to say thank you in front of the team. It wasn't enough to nod respectfully in a hallway. If this company was truly about vision, about innovation, about recognizing unseen potential, then it had to start with truth. And the truth was, Monique deserved more than gratitude. She deserved space, a seat, a platform, a path. Daniel stood up and walked to the large glass window that overlooked the lobby below. It was empty now, lights dimmed, but in his mind he saw her still, standing tall, translating effortlessly, commanding the space they all thought she didn't belong in. Tomorrow, he would start changing that. Chapter 11. A New Door Opens. Monique was halfway through disinfecting the conference room chairs when her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from the front desk. "Hi, Monique. CEO's office requested to see you this morning. No rush, but they said it's important." She froze. Not because she was scared, but because for a moment the past 18 months flashed through her mind. How many chairs she'd wiped in silence. How many times she'd been waved away. How many polished shoes had passed her like she didn't exist. And now she was being summoned there? She took off her gloves, rinsed her hands, and retied her hair. No need to rush. She didn't want to enter that office flustered. She wanted to enter like she belonged, because she did. When she reached the executive floor, the receptionist offered a warm smile. "You can go in, he's waiting." The door to the CEO's office was large but simple. Monique paused, then knocked twice. "Come in," Daniel's voice replied. She stepped inside. Daniel Price stood from behind his desk, no suit today, just a dress shirt, sleeves rolled, tie loose. He looked up, and for the first time since she'd known of him, his eyes were fully present, not transactional, not dismissive. "Monique," he said, "thanks for coming." She nodded. "Of course." "Please, have a seat." She did, cautiously. The chair was plush, the room silent. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "I watched the video," he said. "The whole thing. Twice." Monique remained quiet, listening. "I realized something painful. You didn't just help us with language. You carried the meaning, the energy. You took what we built and made it matter. To them, to everyone in the room." She nodded, just once. He continued. "I also realized we failed you. Repeatedly. We didn't see you. And that's on me." Another pause. A weight lifted in the room, but another one settled. Responsibility. "So I want to ask you something," Daniel said carefully. "We have a role that's been sitting empty. Director of Global Relations. Originally, we imagined it would go to someone from outside, someone with credentials, networks, and multilingual capabilities." He looked at her directly. "You have all three." Monique's eyes flickered, but her posture didn't change. "It's yours if you want it," he said. She didn't answer right away, not out of hesitation, but because she understood the gravity of this moment. This wasn't just a promotion, it was the cracking open of a door she'd stood outside for years. Finally, she spoke, calm, steady. "I'll need a contract, a new title, and a desk near sunlight." Daniel smiled. "Done." Monique stood, not to leave, but to begin. Chapter 12. The new nameplate. The next Monday, before the first espresso machine hissed, and before the CTO checked his email, a new nameplate appeared on the third floor. Monique Johnson, Director of Global Relations. Polished, understated, and centered on a glass door just off the executive corridor, right between strategy and investor relations. It was quiet, like her, but permanent, like her impact. Some people walked past the door and did a double take. Others stared openly, whispering. A few had to look twice to be sure it was that Monique. By 10 a.m., the internal chat was buzzing. "Did you hear? Wait, is that the Monique? From facilities? She speaks Mandarin?" Those who'd laughed before suddenly remembered their laughter and flushed with quiet shame. A few sent awkward messages of congratulations. One even walked past her office, then circled back and said, "Hey, congrats. Really, you earned it." Monique accepted it all with the same grace she had cleaned windows. Effortless, steady, precise. Her new office was modest, with one large window overlooking the front plaza. She'd requested sunlight, not for luxury, but because she was done working in shadows. On her desk sat a framed quote from one of her favorite Chinese poets, Li Qingzhao. "Words are tears unshed." It reminded her of every moment she'd swallowed hurt, of every time her voice had gone unheard, of every floor she'd scrubbed while someone shouted tech jargon beside her. But now, her words weren't just heard, they were wanted. A knock came at her door. It was the CEO, Daniel, holding 2 cups of tea. "I didn't know how you take your coffee," he said, sheepish. "So I guessed." Monique smiled. "I prefer tea," he exhaled. "Lucky guess." He handed her a cup, then glanced at the quote on her desk. He read it aloud, then said, "Powerful." She nodded. "It reminds me to speak up, now that I'm being listened to." Daniel nodded. "We're better for it." They sipped in quiet for a moment, not as boss and staff, but as 2 professionals aware of a turning point. "I hope this is a start," Daniel said. "Not just for you, but for how we treat talent. Period." "It can be," Monique replied, "if the system doesn't forget this time." He nodded solemnly. As he left, Monique turned to her computer. She had a full day ahead. Cultural briefings, language workshops, a draft memo to prep for a new round of international negotiations. It was the same building, same halls, same desks. But now, when people passed her office, they looked in, and this time, they saw her. Chapter 13, The Recognition Room. It started with a calendar invite titled Company Recognition and Vision Session, All Hands. At first, it looked routine, just another quarterly gathering in the auditorium. But this time, the header read, "Hosted by executive team plus special guest." Whispers filled the air days before. Is it about the China deal? New leadership announcement? Maybe a restructuring? Nobody expected what they got. That Friday afternoon, the entire company gathered in the glass-walled auditorium on the 4th floor. Rows of chairs filled with engineers, analysts, interns, custodians. Everyone. On stage stood Daniel, the CEO, flanked by department heads, all dressed sharp, faces unusually solemn. He stepped to the mic. "I won't take up much of your time," he began, "but I need to tell you a story about someone who changed everything." And then, with every eye in the room watching, he told the story of Monique. Not the sanitized, feel-good version. He told the truth. How they had overlooked her, how she had offered help, how they laughed, how she stepped in, spoke up, and saved the most important meeting in the company's history. How they had almost missed the brightest mind among them because of a uniform. The room was dead silent. Daniel turned and extended his hand. Monique stepped onto the stage. No mop in sight, no badge that read facilities, just presence. She wore a navy blazer over a clean white blouse, the same calm poise, the same grounded dignity, but this time the whole company was watching and listening. She took the mic. "Some of you know me," she said. "Many of you didn't. I don't blame you." A quiet chuckle rippled. "I've spent a lot of time in this building, cleaning, listening, learning. What I've come to understand is this. Brilliance doesn't wear a title, and dignity doesn't come with a job description." She looked around the room, every department, every level. If we're serious about innovation, about inclusion, then we need to start looking beyond resumes, beyond who talks the loudest. We need to ask, who are we not seeing? A hush. Then spontaneous applause, not out of pity, out of respect. As she stepped down, several people rose to their feet, then more. The whole room. It wasn't performative. It was overdue. Later, when the video was shared on the company portal, it was titled simply, "Seeing Monique." And that day, Nextera didn't just recognize one woman. They recognized what they had almost lost. Chapter 14. The Mentor Becomes the Mirror. Monique didn't hang awards on her walls. She didn't print out the company-wide newsletter praising her speech. She didn't rewatch the standing ovation clip. She simply went back to work. Only now, her work had changed. She wasn't cleaning the corners of other people's offices anymore. She was building spaces of her own, spaces where the unseen could be heard. Within her first month as Director of Global Relations, Monique launched something quiet, but powerful. an internal program called Voices You Missed. It wasn't flashy. No big branding, no PR campaign. Just a private room, a calendar, and a message sent to every department. If you know someone brilliant who gets overlooked, send them here. Or if you are that person, let's talk. At first, only a few came. A shy intern from accounting who designed AI models in her free time. A janitor who coded during his night shifts. A logistics coordinator who spoke 4 languages but had never been asked to sit in a client meeting. Monique met with every one of them, not just to listen, but to reflect back their worth. She didn't make speeches. She didn't mentor from a pedestal. She sat beside them, eye to eye, saying what no one had said to her for too long. I see you. And then came the ripple. Managers began asking different questions. Recruiting widened its lens. HR introduced anonymous innovation submissions, so ideas could stand without bias. Departments began rotating junior staff into pitch meetings, and everywhere, Monique was there, quietly shaping culture. She didn't want credit. She wanted change. One afternoon, a young woman from facilities stopped by her office with a question. She wore the same navy blue uniform Monique once did. She stood at the door, nervous. Ms. Johnson, I wanted to say thank you. What you did, what you're doing, it made me think maybe I could do more too. Monique smiled. Call me Monique, she said. And yes, you can. She invited the woman in. They sat, talked, laughed, compared stories. And before she left, Monique handed her something. A clean new notebook, blank, waiting. Fill it, Monique said. They'll catch up. Chapter 15. Now they see her. Monique stood in the lobby one morning, coffee in hand, watching the building come alive. Same floors, same glass walls, same rush of people. But everything felt different now. A new intern greeted her with a nervous smile. Good morning, Director Johnson. She smiled back. Morning. Not long ago, she would have been wiping down those elevator buttons, ignored by the same people now holding them open for her. She didn't need the title, but it had given her something deeper than prestige, presence. In meetings now, when strategy teams debated global markets, they asked her opinion first. When engineers discussed product translations, they looped her in from the start. And when someone said, that's too ambitious, Monique only raised an eyebrow and said, try again. She had become something more than a success story. She had become a standard. And still, she never moved far from where she began. She checked in with the facilities team weekly, knew their birthdays, left thank you notes on supply carts. She'd walked in their shoes. She never wanted them to feel invisible again. One day, while passing the same glass panel she once cleaned, she paused. Her reflection stared back, not in uniform but in a navy blazer, chin lifted. She thought of the first time she offered to help, the laughter, the silence, the door that didn't open, until she opened it herself. Now others were walking through it. Voices once muted were now writing code, pitching ideas, leading projects. Nextera had become more than a company with cutting-edge tech. It had become a company with eyes that had learned to see. And Monique? She hadn't changed who she was. They had just finally caught up. As she walked away from the glass, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. They saw her now.